For 35 years, fans thought the danger in Boyz n the Hood belonged entirely to the screen. They were wrong. Ice Cube has now revealed just how much of the film's tension came from circumstances the cast never expected, with real-world threats affecting production in ways audiences could never see. Even his own path into the movie was far more unlikely than most fans realize. What really happened behind the cameras, and how much of what audiences saw was actually unfolding around the cast? Join us as we uncover the stories Ice Cube finally confirmed about Boyz n the Hood. A 23-year-old kid. The story of Boyz n the Hood began in a university classroom, where a young man from South Central Los Angeles was being asked to produce a writing sample for his application to the USC film program. John Singleton was not yet the youngest Oscar-nominated director in history. He was just a kid from Inglewood, trying to get into school. The writing sample he produced was the foundation of what would become one of the most important American films of the 20th century. John initially developed the film as a requirement for his application to film school in 1986 and sold the script to Columbia Pictures upon graduation in 1990. He was 22 years old when he sold it. He had no feature film credits and had not directed a student film. He went into the room with Columbia Pictures and told them he wanted to write and direct a film about 3 black teenagers growing up in South Central Los Angeles, and he wanted $6 million to do it. Columbia said yes. They said yes not because they believed in the project particularly, but because the numbers were low enough that the downside was manageable, and the upside, if it worked, was significant. What nobody at Columbia anticipated was how completely this film would work. The film was shot entirely in sequence, a genuine rarity on any professional production, from October 1st to November 28, 1990, exclusively on location in South Central Los Angeles. John said later that this is why the camera work gets stronger as the movie progresses. He was finding his footing as a director in real time, and because the film was shot in order, that growth is visible on screen if you know to look for it. The opening sequences have the slight uncertainty of a young filmmaker still discovering his language. By the time Ricky died in that alley, John's visual authority was complete. The film grossed $57.5 million at the domestic box office against a production budget of approximately $6 million, nearly a 10-to-1 return on investment. It screened in the Uncertain Regard section at Cannes in May 1991. It earned Oscar nominations for Best Director and Best Original Screenplay, and at 24 years old, John Singleton became the youngest person ever nominated for Best Director and the first African American to receive that nomination, a record that still stands today. None of that was expected. Columbia saw a small film with no big stars that might reach a specific audience. What they got was something that redefined what American cinema could do with black stories and black lives. But the making of it was far more dangerous and far more complicated than any of those awards presentations acknowledged. Because the neighborhood where John was filming was not a backdrop, it was an active participant in the production, and it had its own opinions about what was being made. What exactly did the neighborhood do when it found out what was being filmed on its streets, and how close did the whole production come to never finishing at all? A blood leader who demanded a meeting. When John Singleton arrived on set at 5:30 in the morning on October 1st, 1990, 2 hours before the official call time, he was already thinking about everything that could go wrong. He was filming in South Central Los Angeles. The neighborhood was not a controlled environment. Cuba Gooding Jr. said that there were fistfights and threats every day on the production, and John confirmed in his DVD commentary that after multiple altercations on set, there was a genuine ongoing threat of gun violence from local gang members who had strong opinions about how their community was being portrayed. The crew's response to that threat was practical and unsettling in equal measure. They requested that a van be parked behind them while filming so that if a drive-by shooting did happen, the cast and crew would have some protection between them and the street. A production van as a ballistic shield. That was the safety plan on a major studio film in 1990. The most serious confrontation came when a Bloods leader named Bone demanded a meeting with the film's producer, Steve Nicolaides. Bone had heard about a scene in the film where Ice Cube's character Doughboy, who is strongly implied throughout the film to be a Crip, shoots and kills members of a rival crew that is equally strongly implied to be Bloods. Bone sat down with Nicolaides and made his position plain. He was aware they were planning to shoot a scene where Ice Cube blows away 3 Bloods at a hamburger stand. The real-life gang member made clear that he was not responsible for what might happen if someone actually shot Ice Cube for portraying their gang negatively. John responded to this with characteristic directness. "They didn't come up to me," he said in a Vice interview. Steve had a meeting with a dude who called himself the leader of all the Bloods in LA. First of all, there's no leader of all the Bloods in LA. It's not West Side Story. The dismissal was confident. The threat, however, was real. The scene in question required a filming location change because the production could not ignore the credibility of what had been communicated in that cafe. A scene depicting Doughboy killing rivals was moved away from the location that had been scouted, and additional security measures were added for the remainder of the shoot. Ice Cube has spoken publicly about how close the whole production came to genuine violence on multiple occasions. In a recent YouTube clip that went viral, Ice Cube shares one of the wildest behind-the-scenes stories from the making of Boyz in the Hood, revealing how the production almost turned into a real shootout involving Ice Cube's own lynch mob crew and local gang members who had taken issue with what was being filmed in their neighborhood. The incident involved a fight that broke out between members of the lynch mob and a local kid, which escalated to the point where weapons became part of the conversation. The production survived it, but only barely. What none of the external threats could have predicted was the risk that came from inside the film itself, a directing decision John made deliberately and secretly, and that the cast only discovered decades later when Ice Cube finally told the world what had actually happened during the most famous scene in the movie. John Singleton fired real guns at his cast. The Crenshaw scene in Boyz in the Hood is one of the most kinetically alive sequences in American cinema. Characters move through the famous boulevard in a state of building tension, the crowd pressing around them, and then, without warning, without any clear visual signal, gunfire erupts. The panic that follows is immediate and completely convincing. People scatter, bodies hit the ground, eyes go wide with an authentic terror that the best screen acting in the world would struggle to manufacture. For 30 years, audiences assumed this was the product of skilled performance. Ice Cube finally revealed the truth in a tweet that landed like a bomb in the film community. He wrote, "Rehearsing the Crenshaw scene for Boyz in the Hood, John never told us that it would be real gunfire during the scene. All reactions were real. John was brilliant. I miss him." John had arranged for actual shots to be fired during the filming of a scene in a South Central neighborhood in 1990, without telling his cast when the shots were coming, or that they were coming at all. The only direction he gave was for Ice Cube to drive off in his 1964 Chevy Impala when he heard the sound. Everything else, the terror, the scrambling, the bodies dropping and running, and the whole physics of sudden panic, was completely unscripted and completely authentic. So in his DVD commentary, John said that genuine reactions to the sound of gunfire are what created the perfect chaos on screen. He was right. There is a specific quality to the way a human body responds to a sudden loud noise that cannot be replicated by telling an actor to react to a sudden loud noise that is coming. The information that something dangerous just happened reaches the body before the mind can process it and impose any kind of conscious response. That delay, that split second of pure animal reaction, is what the Crenshaw scene captures, and it is why it has never been matched in any subsequent depiction of street violence in American film. This was not the only time John used unexpected gunfire to generate authentic reactions. To keep every gun scene as real as possible in the film, the director never told his actors when shots would be fired throughout the production. Morris Chestnut experienced a version of this that nearly turned fatal. In the scene where a character named Ferris fires a Mac 11 into the air, Morris, who was never warned about the shooting, fled to Trey's car and fell, almost getting run over by Doughboy's Chevy Impala. This near accident was never supposed to be part of the film, but the authenticity of the moment was too good for John not to use it. John's method was extreme. It was also effective. The film's dialogue also carries the authenticity of its locations. because actual gunshots and police helicopters were constant background noise during filming on the streets of South Central. Large portions of the film's audio had to be dubbed over in post-production because the location sound was contaminated by real-world violence. The movie about violence in South Central Los Angeles was literally interrupted by violence in South Central Los Angeles while it was being made. Ice Cube's tweet about the Crenshaw scene reframed 35 years of audience understanding in a single sentence. What fans had watched as a magnificent performance was actually a documentary. The question that remains is how Ice Cube ended up in that scene at all, because the story of how he got the role is one of the most unlikely in Hollywood history. Ice Cube bombed the audition completely. Ice Cube did not have a clean path to Doughboy. He had a messy, humiliating path that most actors would not have survived, and he survived it entirely because John Singleton had decided before the audition that there was only one person on Earth who could play this character. Despite having zero film acting experience, the part of Doughboy was specifically written for Ice Cube from the very beginning of the project. John approached Cube several times at rap concerts, but Cube was hesitant to commit to an official screen test. Ice Cube was deep in his music career at this point and was skeptical about making the jump to acting. He had watched Ice-T do New Jack City and Kid and Play Do House Party and thought, okay, maybe it's time for rappers to make movies. But when he finally showed up to audition, he hadn't read the script properly and hadn't memorized his lines. He kept messing up. The audition was, by his own description, terrible. Most directors would have concluded that their casting instinct was wrong and moved on. John did the opposite. He held his ground, believed in what he had seen in Ice Cube's natural presence and in the direct connection between the rapper's own biography and the character he had written, and waited for Ice Cube to find his way into the role. When Ice Cube finally went home, sat down with the script, and actually read it properly, everything changed. He recognized his own life on the page. He recognized people he had grown up with, situations he had navigated, and a neighborhood he had lived in and survived. He came back ready, and the performance he delivered became the film's emotional center. Delivered directly to the camera, became the most quoted passage in Boyz n the Hood history. Either they don't know, don't show, or don't care about what's going on in the hood. John later said he cried while writing that monologue. Ice Cube said the crying scenes were the hardest for him because he had spent his whole life burying his feelings. The tension between the character's emotional openness and the actor's instinct to close down is part of what makes the final scene so devastating. Now here is the detail that fans watched for 35 years without seeing. By the time Ice Cube was cast in Boyz n the Hood, he had already left NWA, following a financial dispute with manager Jerry Heller, and the relationship between him and his former bandmates, particularly Eazy-E, had gone cold with mutual animosity. John wanted NWA members to play Doughboy's friends, but the tension from Ice Cube's departure made that impossible. So the NWA members disappeared from the film, and John left a specific calling card in their place. Ice Cube brought old Eazy-E shirts to the set. In one scene, a crack addict wearing one of the Eazy-E shirts runs past and tries to steal the character Dookie's gold chain, but he is caught and beaten down by Doughboy. John confirmed this was deliberate in his DVD commentary. It was an inside joke, a piece of encoded commentary on the NWA, a feud hidden in a film that most of its audience watched, without realizing they were watching Ice Cube symbolically punishing Eazy-E in a Hollywood film. When Ice Cube finally confirmed this publicly, it recontextualized that scene completely. The real Eazy-E later told Spin magazine that Boyz n the Hood reminded him of a Monday after-school special with cussing, adding that Ice Cube was only being used to sell the film. That particular piece of irony writes itself, and the opening night of that film produced its own irony, one that was far darker than anything encoded in the script, and that changed how studios, distributors, and theater owners thought about black cinema for years afterward. The violent opening night. John Singleton spent the opening night of Boyz n the Hood moving between theaters, slipping in through the back, watching audiences react to what he had made. He rented a limousine, He rode around his native Los Angeles with USC friends and cast members. He stopped at the Baldwin Hills Crenshaw Plaza, the theater he had frequented as a kid, and thanked the audience for their support. A woman approached him with her boyfriend, a man John described as clearly having done time, whose eyes were red and watery. The man said nothing. Then he reached out, grabbed John's hand, and shook it. Minutes after John left the Cineplex Odeon in Universal City, gunfire erupted outside the theater, and 5 people were wounded. On opening weekend, shots were fired at cinemas in 8 cities across the country. 2 people died. Michael Booth, a 23-year-old security guard, shot in his car as he was leaving the Halstead Twin Outdoor Theater in Riverdale, Illinois, having just seen the film, and G2 Jones, shot outside a downtown Minneapolis theater, in Tukwila, Washington. The incidents cascaded across the country. In Sacramento, a 19-year-old woman was shot 6 times in the chest and shoulder when 2 young men opened fire on deputies, breaking up fights outside a theater. In Detroit, a teenager was shot in the arm and 2 others were stabbed at 2 separate locations. In Akron, a 16-year-old was shot in the abdomen outside a theater. The violence was real, it was geographically spread, and it arrived on the same night as a film whose final frame read, "Increase the peace." John faced reporters the next morning at a press conference at Columbia's Culver City headquarters. He had just watched his first film become a national flashpoint for conversations about black violence, criminality, and whether movies like his should be made at all. His response was clear. "My heart goes out to the families of the people that were hurt last night. I didn't create the conditions that make people shoot each other." Columbia made a decision that required genuine corporate courage in that moment. They elected not to pull the film from distribution, instead offering to pay for increased security at any theater that continued to show it. They could have capitulated to the pressure. They chose not to. And the decision protected not just Boyz n the Hood, but the principle that black filmmakers making films about black lives had the right to have those films exhibited without being held responsible for the social conditions their films documented. The media framing of the violence was something John and others in the film community pushed back against directly. The headline logic, that Boyz n the Hood had caused the violence, collapsed under even minimal scrutiny. These were incidents that occurred at a theater showing a film about gang violence in a city where gang violence was already killing people at record rates, in a year when the Rodney King arrest had already brought the city's tension to a boiling point. The film did not create those conditions. It described them. The people holding the guns on opening night had not learned violence from 90 minutes of cinema. They had learned it from the same streets that John had grown up on. The same streets where John had filmed his movie with a production van parked behind the crew as a shield against drive-bys. What happened after that opening weekend, both to the film's legacy and to Ice Cube specifically, is the part of the story that most people know only in outline, without the specific details that make it remarkable. What the film did to everyone it touched. The aftermath of Boyz n the Hood belongs to multiple people simultaneously. It belongs to John Singleton, who went from a 23-year-old film school graduate to an Oscar nominee in less than 1 year. It belongs to Cuba Gooding Jr., whose performance as Trey announced him as a dramatic actor of genuine range. It belongs to Morris Chestnut, whose physical grace and emotional openness as Ricky made his death. It belongs to Lawrence Fishburne, who delivered the most complete portrait of black fatherhood American cinema had produced to that point. And it belongs to Ice Cube in a lasting way, because Boyz n the Hood did not just give him an acting career, it gave him something to build a creative life around. Once Ice Cube accepted the role, and John saw what he was capable of. John later encouraged Cube to write his own scripts. That encouragement led directly to the Friday franchise a few years later. In 2002, the United States Library of Congress selected Boyz n the Hood for preservation in the National Film Registry, deeming it culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. The film joined the canon alongside the works that defined American cinema across the previous century. California Governor Pete Wilson, upon the film's release in 1991, recommended that all Americans watch Boyz n the Hood. A conservative Republican governor recommended a film about gang violence in south-central Los Angeles. That is the measure of how completely the film crossed the boundaries that Hollywood assumed would contain it. It was supposed to be a small film for a specific audience. It became an American document. Does knowing that the fear on those faces was completely real change the way you will watch Boyz n the Hood the next time you sit down with it? And which detail from this story hit you hardest? The secret gunfire, the Eazy-E shirt hidden in plain sight for 35 years, or the fact that Ice Cube nearly fumbled the most important audition of his life? Share your thoughts in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.